through with your rhythm. I have not completed the forms, but I will.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
All right. So let's get started. And if that's okay with you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for doing this. I am Riley Temple. I'm here on behalf of the African American Episcopal Historical Collection of Virginia Theological Seminary. And our guest today is Thurgood Marshall Jr., who is a prominent attorney in the Washington area and a member of a very prominent American family. He is Episcopalian, which is why we're interested in his oral history and his story. And Thurgood, unless you have any questions before we begin, why don't we just start?
No, thanks for having me.
So we're basically interested in your how the Episcopal Church may or may not have shaped you. So let's begin with when and where were you born?
New York City, Harlem Hospital, August 1956.
1956. And how long did you live in New York?
Just about 10 years.
About 10 years. Did you live in Harlem?
Yes. For a couple of years on up around 155th.
Mm-hmm.
And then we moved to about 2 blocks south of the 125th Street cutoff line.
Yes.
So it was 100. We were at 123rd in Amsterdam.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're at that location and you say Harlem, people in Harlem bristle, and if you're at that location and you say Upper West Side, people in the Upper West Side bristle. But it was sort of between Columbia University and Harlem.
Yes. I had a friend who lived.
We were also the initial home was it was the one I mentioned at 155th was actually a wonderful historic building, and the address is 409 Edgecombe Avenue.
Why was it historic?
It was well, I think the architecture was noteworthy, but it also had at one point it had a number of prominent individuals from that period, including W.B. Du Bois.
Really? That's wonderful.
And it had a view of Yankee Stadium. So we've got.
And were any of those famous people, other than your father, of course, still living there when you were a boy?
Yes, but I have I have memories of visiting the building in the neighborhood, but that's from when we moved. I don't have, we moved before I was forming.
I see.
Memories.
I see. And you have a younger brother, correct?
That's right. And actually the sports writer, William Roden, currently lives in the building.
Oh, I know. Oh, my goodness. No, I'm going to have to.
Yes, sorry to interrupt.
No, I'm going to have to.
My brother came along 2 years later in July of 58.
July of 58. And were you still living on Edgecombe Avenue then when your brother was born?
I don't believe so.
Okay. How would you describe your earliest childhood memories? And how would you describe your growing up years?
Well, very fortunate to be in a fully intact household in a community that was just very, particularly for New York City, very tight knit. When we moved to 123rd in Amsterdam, it was a development called Morningside Gardens, which was a series of 20 plus story co-op buildings. Mm-hmm. And they were pretty well self-contained on one huge block, with market and most things you'd need downstairs along Amsterdam Avenue, and brownstones across the street, 123rd, and endless numbers of visitors and family friends, and the kids would play in that large block area there. So a lot of we didn't play stickball, we played punch ball, but there were a lot of outdoor activities available. It was really pretty ideal. Went to nursery school in that small community there, and then went to grade school over on the east side.
Is that the
And we
Dalton
moved
school?
to DC. It is.
And so you
We
started
had
school
recess
at
on the
Dalton.
roof there.
I'm sorry.
Yes, started kindergarten at Dalton.
And how long did you attend Dalton?
Left ninth grade came to DC.
And why did you come to DC?
I was trying to think of something pithy to say there, but it was my father had been appointed to be the Solicitor General of the United States by President Lyndon Johnson. And he served in that position at the Justice Department for about 2 years. And we lived in Southwest Washington.
Okay. And he was Solicitor General for 2 years, and then he ascended to the Supreme Court in what, 1967?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And how
Again,
old were you?
President Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, 11.
11. So you have vivid memories of those times.
Right.
What was
And
it like?
actually,
for you?
I think I may have misspoken, Riley. When I moved, it was fourth grade. I think I might have said ninth grade, but I was around 9, 10. Sorry if I misstated that.
And now, when you came to Washington, what school did you go to?
Georgetown Day School on
Georgetown
MacArthur
Day.
Boulevard.
Right, right.
Private school in Washington, D.C., the first school in the city that was desegregated, actually.
Mm-hmm. How many years before you got there did it desegregate?
I don't know. That question was flashing through my mind just as I said those very words.
Mm-hmm. Did you enjoy it?
Yes, quite a lot. Made a number of friends there. The teachers, I was very fortunate that I had some very understanding teachers who were persistent in trying to keep me and my classmates focused. They were a little more tolerant of my mischief, and although I managed to get into a lot of trouble as a child in school, they kept me from succumbing to distraction through that mischief, and they actually managed to punish me, but also continue my learning.
Well, I have two questions. First, how would you have compared Georgetown Day to Dalton?
I've never given that any thought. I would say, looking back on it, that Dalton was much more structured. I didn't realize it at the time, but it had more of an elite feel to it.
Indeed.
And it's a moneyed environment, and that was, looking back on it, a pretty stark component of that experience. I think Georgetown Day may well have similar profiles in terms of its students and families, but it was a more relaxed environment in that sense.
Yeah. You just told me something a few seconds ago that I did not know about you, and that is that you had mischief as a boy. What was that like? What did you do?
A lot of cutting up in class, and it was really, I'm surprised that you're surprised, given that you've certainly seen my level of maturity at times, Riley.
This is for the record. They're good.
Yes, I'm sorry. It does turn out that I did in some ways. I shouldn't say I inherited that streak, but it is a similar track to my father, at least on the mischief side. He managed to be at the top of his class while getting into a lot of trouble while in school. And the story about that was in Baltimore. He was the punishment for a period of time was to be sent down to the furnace room to memorize sections of the Constitution.
And that's how it began. But of course, he remained puckish throughout his entire life, didn't he?
Indeed.
Yeah. Did you go to church in Harlem?
Yes.
Where?
And as I recall, every Sunday. I think if we had missed one, I think it would have been noteworthy, but perhaps we did. But it was certainly the rhythm of our life in the city there.
Uh-huh. And what church was it?
St. Phillips Episcopal on 134th.
Story.
Which, as it turns out, was about halfway between the two homes that we lived in up there. Mm-hmm. So it was walking distance from both.
Mm-hmm. Were you active as a boy in the church?
Not really. I remember being very upset when it was always time for Sunday school, and I would have to leave to go downstairs to classes. Mm-hmm. And I missed I preferred to be with my folks and their people upstairs, and wanted to hear the rest of the ceremony and the service. But
right.
That learning experience was very important, despite the fact that I kind of groused at having to step away. But we would always march out to Onward Christian Soldiers to go to class, which I did enjoy that part of it. And there's a beautiful, huge organ in that church.
Yes, it is. So what was it that was so significant about that educational experience that proved so invaluable to you?
Well, I was not prepared for it, so it just came as a pleasant surprise that there's a point where I could be going for worship, but in effect stepping away to not only understand the mysteries of what was going on upstairs, but to have these doors opened to the stories and the symbolism and the meaning. And then, of course, there's the standard sort of memorization and rote process as well, which I think was important in many ways that I didn't fully realize, because I certainly, it certainly has, it provides benefits in school and elsewhere in terms of processes and grounding.
Do you remember those same passages, psalms today that you learned then?
Yes and no. And the rhythms are something that I take comfort in, and that because of the similarities, of course, it transfers for me into a number of other religions as well. Yeah. I was in Catholic service just 2 weeks ago, and the similarities are always striking to me.
Yes. Yes. Um, and how long were you at Georgetown Day here in Washington?
Only 4 or 5 years. 'Cause I left in ninth grade.
Ninth grade. And
Yeah, 14, and went away to school.
where'd you go?
Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire.
Right.
4 years.
Yeah. Did you like boarding school?
I did. More opportunities for mischief, but I think that was particularly helpful for me because I think the structure and being on my own to a certain extent forced me to be a little more serious about my studies. And they had great sports facilities, and I think the camaraderie at what in those days was a predominantly male boarding school. I mean, I was there the first year that it was co-ed, but there was a very small contingent of girls in those days. And of course, it was not co-ed dorms. So,
right. Those poor girls, those first girls.
Yeah.
Living in a petri dish. Now, when you lived in Southwest and when you moved to Washington, did you go to church here?
Mm-hmm.
Where?
We did. My mother found a church. We were, as I mentioned, our first couple of homes in DC were located in the Southwest area, mm-hmm. which is now becoming more and more consumed by the new wharf. And that area for a while had the fish markets, which really were not markets so much as boats that would back up to a parking lot. Mm-hmm. And my father could get his beloved crabs there and from the bay. Yeah. And across there from that area where the wharf is and the original makeshift wharf were several seafood restaurants, including one called Hogate's. And my mother learned through friends and through neighbors that there was a new church that was meeting for worship at the Hogate's, the old Hogate's restaurant, which was one of those. It was Hogate's, Flagship, and a couple of others. And so I don't recall how long, and I was trying to piece this together, but for the first period of our time in Washington, St. Augustine's, which is where we were going and where my mother had done this research, was meeting at Hogate's.
I see.
And then they had a new building that appeared across the street from the Arena Stage Theater, and a similar architecture, so that they would get confused with each other. Mm-hmm. And the church has been rebuilt actually in recent years and is still located right there.
Yeah, I've come to know some of the people at St. Augustine's very well, including Conchasa Holman Conwell.
Yes.
And the Holman family, yeah. When did you?
And it's now attached to a condominium, actually. There were all sorts of, she can run through the details of that, the twists and turns, and whether they were going to lose their location completely or work out an arrangement. And I think I was only getting not only filtered, but partial information on that through my mom. But they have a beautiful location that's attached to a condominium.
Did you enjoy worship there?
Yes. Yeah. And we eventually were living on 4th Street, which is about 2 or 3 blocks away. And I was able to go early and help do setup. And I'm not normally an early riser. So I still look back on that with some curiosity. I mean, I don't fully recall how that process got started, but I used to go in early and help get the books and paperwork set up and do
Did you
little
work on
odd
the
errands
altar?
for the staff. No, although my mother has for many years.
What does that mean? She was the altar in the altar guild?
Yes.
Okay.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Probably trying
And
to have a little insight into the wine cabinet a little more than, but she's always been very involved there.
yeah. Is she still a member there?
Yes. Although it's been many months since she has physically been in the building
Mhm.
because of the pandemic. But she, for a while, was participating in the services by telephone,
Wow.
and and now my brother has worked it out so she can use an iPad for that.
Mhm.
I think, as far as I can tell, it's the only use that she has for an iPad. Is her Sunday mornings at St. Augustine's.
I think I mentioned to you, or you mentioned to me, and then I recall having seen it, and I still can't figure out where it is, or where I saw it. But you mentioned a search for a Bible that was used when your father was sworn into the Supreme Court, and and its relationship, and in the process coming across a medal that was presented to your father at St. Phillips, the picture of which I think I've
Yes.
seen. Can you tell us that story?
Oh, thank you so much for asking. It was a wonderful surprise in many ways, both in terms of being asked when the vice president-elect expressed an interest, but then to have this series of events occur where we discovered the Bible that you're asking about. She had asked if she
Vice President Harris.
could use that's right, then Vice President-elect, if she could use the Bible that my father had used to swear in as an Associate Justice of the United States. And I knew exactly where it was. And of course, I knew my mother would be overjoyed, and my brother. And when we tracked it down, I told Mignon Moore, who you know, who
Yes.
is a political advisor to the vice president, that I wanted to alert them to the backstory on this particular Bible, which is featured in some photos of him being sworn in. It's a white leather-bound Bible, and Justice Black, who was serving on the court at the time, administered the oath, and he was so touched that my father asked him, and moved by being part of that he gave his Bible to my father and had it inscribed and embossed. And the story there was that Justice Black had been a senior member of the Ku Klux Klan at one point in his life, early in his life, and he became involved in law and politics, and that certainly helped him in Alabama. Became a senator, United States senator. And when this Klan membership came up and he was on the court, it became a bit of a controversy, not surprisingly, even though that was many years ago. So I thought I should alert them to the fact that there was this history. And it didn't take Mignon and Vice President-elect Harris and that team to figure out that they understood the gravity and the importance of that historical background, but the ability to explain it in modern parlance, which sometimes can be limited to 140 characters, was probably going to be a little more complicated than the value. And so then the question was, is there another Bible that was meaningful in the family? And to make a long story short, my sister-in-law looked in the first logical place, but there are many Bibles in my mother's house, but she went to the nightstand by my mom's bed. And the first one that she spotted was this Bible that you've seen. which is a beautiful leather-bound Bible with a zipper and a cross on the zipper. It had not been opened, and my brother opened it up, and out falls this ribbon with a beautiful cross medallion on it, and it's inscribed. And it was the Vestryman's Award for the year, I think it was 1957, or no, I'm sorry, 62. And he was Vestryman of the Year, and it was presented on Men's Day at St. Philip's by Father Moran Weston. And that photo that you referenced is a beautiful photo that was in a book, Devil in the Grove, that Gilbert King wrote. And that medal is featured in the photo. That was the day.
This is the book. Yeah.
That is it. That is it.
Yeah.
And so it has very special meaning. It's a Holy Bible concordance, and so it's also of interest in that way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Did they use it?
And the vice president, they did use it, along with a Harris family Bible, and Vice President Harris and her husband both signed my father's Bible, and
Thurgood.
very excited. We're very excited.
Thurgood.
Yeah.
Oh.
And we got it right back to its special spot, because my mother was after me on at least a daily basis about making sure they gave it back to us.
Yeah.
As if there was some risk. Yeah.
Well, Thurgood, sometimes your mother was absolutely right, because sometimes, these things can get legs.
Well, they can, but I also understood that was, an empty spot in her nightstand. That was a very special spot.
And from Phillips Exeter, you came back south, right? And
Right.
went to the University of Virginia.
7 years, undergraduate and law school.
So you are a double who?
I'm afraid so.
Yes. I have one of those in my family. Insufferable. Did you enjoy Charlottesville and the university?
I did, but it also opened my eyes to some unfortunate things in American society. It turns out that it's only a couple of hours south of Washington, but it's significantly different in terms of attitudes about people who are just the slightest bit different. And I think there were many positive aspects pushing back on those old attitudes, but it was a bit of an eye-opener for me to see it in person that way.
Are you in
More
touch
so-
with, go ahead.
More so during my undergrad years, not at the law school, but in the community, there were issues, and I'm not there enough to know how far forward they've come. It was certainly unfortunate to see the developments several years ago with the General Lee statue. But the then mayor, I thought, did an impressive job, and a number of local community leaders.
I also see that the University of Virginia is dealing with its slave past.
Yes. Yeah, and that was, there were glimmers of that while I was there, because of the Sally Hemings issue sort of coming to the fore during my period in Charlottesville.
So what year did you graduate from law school?
81.
81. That's the beginning of 1981 was when Ronald Reagan took the oath of office. So you started law school in Ronald Reagan's first term.
Right.
When did you decide to become a lawyer?
No idea. I always assumed I would, and I think I was not sure how I would use that training as I began to realize as I got older that if I went to law school and pursued that as a career, there'd be a number of options open to me. I never fully grasped which of those made the most sense, and it was probably healthy to have an open mind about it. But I don't recall a time when I thought I would be doing something else.
Mm-hmm. And then you clerked for Judge Parker, is it? Judge Barrington Parker?
Yes, Barrington Parker Sr. in Washington, D.C.,
Mm-hmm.
District Court Judge.
Mm-hmm. And how was clerking for you?
That was an absolutely wonderful experience.
How so?
I was able to, I love to write. I was able to spend a lot of time writing. Judge Parker used his clerks primarily to work on draft decisions, opinions, and motions decisions, and to help him review the cases that he was working on. He was a tremendous writer, so I feel as if I learned a lot from him to improve my writing.
Mm-hmm.
He needed no help with writing research or running his courtroom, but he made a lot of use of his law clerks in all of those different aspects of life in his chambers and in his courtroom. And he had a knack for drawing a lot of interesting cases, and they generally get assigned by the wheel, literally. And Washington, D.C. tends to draw some fascinating cases, and I was blessed with several during my time on duty in his chambers. He had what at the time, every few years, there's a case that gets dubbed the case of the century. And we had what was at the time the case of the century, which was the John Hinckley attempted assassination of the president trial, and all the run up to that. We had a number of other interesting cases, but that was the one that was the sort of the headline grabber every day during my tenure.
Yeah, it happened during the first year of his term, which would have been that year that you were clerking. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Right. I showed up and he had the incident, of course, occurred as I was finishing up school, as we discussed earlier. And then when I showed up, a week or so after I showed up and started work, they had the hearings on whether to plead the insanity defense, and then the process through that. There were then a number of motions and proceedings leading up to it, and then during right at the end of my first year into my second year, we had the full-on trial.
When you were in law school, were you typically a secular law student, secular and an undergrad, and secular undergraduate student, or did you associate with one of the Episcopal churches in Charlottesville?
No, I think I was thinking back on that a while ago, and I did go occasionally with friends, and it was not any particular church. And my church going was more when I would come home
to St. Augustine's.
Yeah.
Yeah. Christmas and Easter and.
That's right. And then plenty of weekends in between. It's only a couple of hours away.
That's right. That's right.
And I was not tempted to go for whatever reason at Virginia to the on-campus chapel. I did when I was in prep school at Exeter. There was I was regularly visiting the campus chapel there, and indeed stayed in touch. My first dorm master was the school preacher at the time, and we stayed in touch off and on over the years, and I appreciated that connection. And actually, the person who only recently retired there was a student when I was there, as a longstanding school pastor. But somehow I didn't make that connection when I was in college.
Yeah.
I preferred to worship at home.
It's quite typical, true. It's the typical pattern.
Mm-hmm.
So you did well in school.
If you say so.
Well, Thurgood, you graduated from the University of Virginia, and then you got into the law school, and then you got a clerkship with a federal judge. You don't get that by eking by.
No. I enjoyed it a lot. And
Mhm.
the tools, I still rely on all of those tools that I picked up in school.
I was especially struck by your mentioning these are my words, not yours, the flexibility of a law degree. I assume that's what you meant, and how the opportunities that it presented. How has that played out in your own life?
Well, I got the political bug early on and interned while I was during the summers while I was in prep school, actually. And those summers happened to be the Watergate summers. So that I really caught the bug in a big way. And it's interesting that you mentioned when I got out of out of law school, it was the beginning of the Reagan era and the first term of the Reagan-Bush presidency. And I recall sitting out in the Lafayette Park with a couple of friends, and we all were lamenting the fact that we had hoped to work in the White House one day, but it wasn't looking like that was going to happen in our lifetimes. But I did find my way to Capitol Hill, and as a committee counsel, and I've sensed that those law school training tools could bring value in politics, and particularly in the policy world. So I was aiming in that direction to get over to Capitol Hill pretty early on in my legal career. And indeed, I think particularly the writing, the research, and the marshaling of facts and ordering arguments, it comes in handy. It still does in terms of understanding policy and conveying policy and suggesting alternatives.
And was that the Senate Commerce Committee?
It eventually, where we crossed paths quite a bit, but it first was the Government Affairs Committee. Al Gore was then a freshman senator, and I had helped out on his Senate campaign, and he unexpectedly got this assignment at the Government Affairs Committee, which was not one he had been pursuing. And one of the things that they did in those days was they dangled more staff opportunities on the committees that were at least appeared to be less desirable. So he suddenly had some unexpected staff slots, and that was my good fortune. And so I was there with him. He pretty quickly ran for president, and I went to go work on his campaign, which you'll recall he ran for president. That was 88.
I remember very well.
Well, it's good that you do, because he jokes that it's no secret that he ran, but it seemed like a secret when we were doing it at the time. But it was a tremendous experience, and learned a lot from that. And he kept me on, and shared me with. I'm very grateful to Senator Fritz Hollings and Ralph Everett, our friend and colleague, to have brought me into their fold at the Commerce Committee.
And this was what, the Consumer Subcommittee?
That was Consumer Subcommittee. And actually, I got my dates wrong, but I did leave that job to go work the campaign. But the Commerce Committee is where I had the chance to work for Gore and Hollings together.
Yes. And what did you do in the presidential campaign?
That campaign, I was the deputy campaign manager.
Okay.
And I handled the issues part of the operation, the issues papers, the correspondence, and then the opposition research. And that was a bit of a learning process. But I think that's another area where it turns out the legal training and some interesting government and history, which I had, come in handy. Mm-hmm. And research in those days was a little harder to do, mm-hmm. but we got it done. And mm-hmm. We finished the campaign rather abruptly mm-hmm. In the New York primary. And I came back and worked for Senator Ted Kennedy on Capitol Hill at the Judiciary Committee after that.
Right. That must have been fascinating.
Tremendous issues, and to learn from him really was fascinating. And to learn not just policy and politics, but what in those days was the collegiality among senators and the ability to forge bipartisan compromises. So I'm a bit of a dinosaur in the hyper-partisan era that we now exist in. And I find that very frustrating to see at a bit of a distance, because less seems to get done.
Yeah. You mentioned, of course, you're writing. Are you writing now?
I've done some writing, but not the sort of analytical, heavy-duty, serious writing that I'd like to be doing. I did a lot of, during the pandemic, a lot of political columns in obscure publications for the most part, and a few that made their way into more broader distribution publications. And as some have suggested, there's some comedians who've suggested that men of a certain age, appear to be cramming for some sort of what can only be described as an exam on World War II. I've had several articles published at the World War II Museum website about a couple of operations in World War II, and also an article I did with Speaker Pelosi's former chief of staff, John Lawrence.
Oh, yeah.
He and I have worked together on the Port Chicago historical site in California, which has tremendous historical significance. And we, on the 75th anniversary of an incident there, had an article published. It turned into a legal case that my father worked on, actually, and it involved the loading of munitions. The United States Navy, many of the sailors of color who thought they were going to be heading off to war were not entrusted with the responsibilities of going off and fighting war in the way that they envisioned. And they were put into menial jobs in many places, but in this instance, loading munitions at the docks in California and elsewhere. And there was no training, there's no safety protocols. And the stevedores who came to see the operation, the local longshoremen and the stevedores who worked the docks as professionals nearby, were a bit appalled and offered to volunteer training and safety and how to handle these explosives. The Navy turned them down and continued to push these sailors to, push through the night and for results and speed rather than any care and safety. And sure enough, the inevitable happened, and just massive explosion with massive casualties. And the next thing they did, after everybody cleaned up the mess, they announced they were going to, anyone who had survived was going to be relocated to this other port where they'd be doing the same work under the same conditions. And some 50 of these sailors who survived refused, and for safety reasons. And they were court-martialed for mutiny and convicted.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And many of them didn't live to see the day when President Clinton and the Defense Department, and with the persistent leadership of Congressman Miller from California, in whose district Port Chicago is, pushed to have those convictions overturned and to have these men honored. And there's a memorial out there now. It's a partially a national park site, but it's still a naval base. And so that's a long way of saying, you asked about doing some writing, but it did sort of trigger that memory. It was a small article about what turns out to have been a major case.
It provides an opportunity for us to segue into some questions I want to ask about the shaping of your moral vision and your view of social justice, as shaped by any number of factors about which I would like you to speak of.
Mm-hmm.
But first, let me ask you, when were you first aware about the significance of your father's work?
Earlier than this is a psychiatrist who probably could break down my choice of words here, but earlier than I can remember.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But because I think so many people would pass through our lives who would say things to me about how special his contributions were. Mm-hmm. And a number of them, people I recognized as luminaries themselves. And that was often,
such as Roger Wilkins, say?
Eventually, but then Judge Robinson, who you've covered in
yes.
your work, and who was, of course, one of my father's colleagues, and who I looked up to for his accomplishments, would say these things. And but also the period in which I was growing up and the location being in and around the Harlem area, the Renaissance up in that area of Manhattan had occurred, and those people would pass through all the time. So, and so if Lena Horne would come by to visit for a party or something, aside from the fact that she would just naturally light up a room, I understood who this was, and I didn't fully understand that, but I understood the magic of that. And that when people like that are saying things about his accomplishments, it's hard to not grasp that something special is involved. And I didn't fully grasp it. And in fact, I think that's partly because he had a fairly constant mantra, which was that the people that he looked up to were the people he represented.
Wow.
And he was constantly telling their stories. and the people that he trusted when he was on the road. And I didn't know at the time just how significant that element of faith was for him and for the people who worked with him, that the people he represented and the people who took care of my father and his colleagues when they were on the road were the level of camaraderie that I would be able to observe when they would visit or we would visit them was clearly very special and warm. What I didn't and couldn't grasp until I was much older was that for many of those relationships, they were forged through the genuine risk to life and livelihood that they shared during those moments. And so there's that sort of foxhole quality to those relationships that I mean, in some respects, I wish I had known sooner, but in other respects, I not only clearly understand why you wouldn't tell a child about those horrors, but it's very moving to me that they shared those experiences, but they didn't dwell on them.
The story of the Florida case, the story of the Devil in the Grove, for example. Frankly, I'm very happy to learn that it took some time for you to know about that, because it would have been terrifying.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's just it's an absolute page turner in every way, and it's spelled out in Gilbert King's beautifully written book, the degree to which what my father said about these individuals and how much he owed to them and how much he respected them for their courage and their persistence. It's unmistakable that he was at times at great risk to himself, able to in effect parachute into places where these people were trying to exist and live their lives. And what I feel as if I could have done a better job on if I had had an earlier start is to learn more and study more about these individuals. The Isabel Wilkerson's book, The Warmth of Other Suns, and covering the migrations, there are, I mean, for so many of those stories, there are woven in them these tales of horror that drove people to move. And then, of course, the question of Devil in the Grove is another example of it. How many people whose stories we'll never know are just lost to history? That was not a unique situation, and the sheriff in that incident was brazen enough to basically arrange to have photographers come and see how he claimed that his life had been threatened, and he fortunately got free, when in fact the photographers were the very people who proved that his story was quite the opposite. But you got to believe that that's not the first time he did something like that, and there's just countless other stories that are untold.
So when you graduated from law school, you had options, and like any graduate of a prestigious law school as UVA is, you could have chosen a life steeped in the grand corporate banking, finance industry, representing enormous corporate interests. You chose not to. How so?
Well, you make it seem as if I opted not to do those things, but what I really did was opt to get involved in politics and public policy pretty early on.
So that was your,
So,
but what I'm saying is that it was a choice at some point.
yes.
Yes.
Yes, and I think public service was something that I felt drawn to in many respects. And when a lot of my colleagues were heading off to law firms for the second year summer law firm experience, I had spent some time in law firms in part-time summer jobs and enjoyed the experience immensely. But I spent that summer after the second year, when most of my classmates were at the law firms, I spent it at the prosecutor's office in Manhattan. And it was because I felt drawn to public service law. And then weaving in politics and an interest in politics, I think it became sort of an imperative that I try to get to Capitol Hill and to presidential campaigns. And I wasn't sure that I'd be able to find my way to the White House, but that was also something I wanted to do. And there are many ways to get there, but it seemed to be the logical pathway for me.
Did you ever consider running for political office? I mean, you have run for a couple of things, I think, but I mean, for national elective office, either in the House or the Senate?
I did think briefly a couple of points, and that's part of the reason I drifted toward the University of Virginia. I had a number of choices, and the quality of the school, and particularly my interest in going to the law school at the University of Virginia, played a role in that decision. But I also thought that a UVA degree would keep that option viable to run for office, but I wasn't sure that I wanted to. And I did look at running a couple of times, but not too seriously.
Are you conscious of the ways that growing up and being involved in policy and social justice have framed you? Are you consciously aware of it, or is it something that you feel happens without a conscious awareness? Do you understand what I'm saying to you?
I think so. And I think I acknowledge that I've been blessed at many turns in my life, but in some ways, the most remarkable blessing has been an opportunity to serve on the board at the Ford Foundation, which to me epitomizes all the good that philanthropy can do and all the imperatives that many of us see in social justice and that portfolio of things. I, like many people who've served on that board, I want to put words in people's mouths because it's such a remarkable institution and it attracts remarkable people on its staff, but also on the board. But I don't think I was alone in my board service at Ford and thinking how much of a blessing it was to be associated with that organization, but also how fortunate I could be if I could actually be working there full time and being able to to contribute to the social good in the way that that organization does.
And it has taken a stunningly kinetic view of social justice under the leadership of Darren Walker.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, and I did have these feelings of awe from afar about the foundation, only to find that once I joined that board, and it was Susan Beresford was the president at the time, to be able to see her work up close and her leadership, and to work with her team, was the first time I was struck by this thought. It is an amazing blessing to be able to contribute in a small way through that board, but to think, what would it be like to be able to contribute the way these individuals are able to do for a few years full time, and two presidents later, they continue to evolve, and Darren has put an amazing mark on, as each of his predecessors did. But his arrival on the scene at the time in our history, when he did, is very special. Now, prior to him, between Susan and Darren, Louis Sabinius was the president of the foundation, and in many ways righted a ship, because he was in the midst of the challenges we had with the economy globally, and in the United States in particular. And
you mean 08, 09?
Yeah, they've had tremendous leadership, but you're right, Darren has built on all the great work of his predecessors in ways that have really, kinetic is exactly the right word to use. You're right.
Tell me about your children. You have two boys?
Last I checked, they don't check in with me as often as they used to, but yes, we've got one in Boston and one in New York.
How old are they, and what are they doing?
They are, let's see, 28 and 32.
Oof.
Does that sound right? Yes.
Thurgood.
I have to do the math in my head. I know. And the older one, Thurgood William, is in Boston and works at the Attorney General's office, doing work in investigations now involving the casino operations in the state of Massachusetts. And his first job in that office, where he said he's not a lawyer by training, he's got an economic training background, and working in an attorney general's office, a state attorney general's office, is something I would love to be able to do. To be able to be a consumer advocate, in effect, is just a tremendous opportunity, especially early in his career like that. And he had been working on housing mortgage fairness for his first stint there. So he's had some interesting work. And my younger one in New York is a musician, and he teaches music, but he's also now embarked on he's becoming a coder. So at some point, you and I, if we have another problem connecting by Zoom, he can probably fix that pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, I have no doubt about that. But what do you mean? What is he? Does he play an instrument? Is he a composer?
He does. Yes, he does all of the above. We're not sure where he got this from. He's always been that. He's one of those. He was one of those kids when he was very little. If someone would say, "What kind of music do you like?" and he would say things like Led Zeppelin, and I would sort of look at him and wonder where that came from.
Yeah.
And it turns out he ended up going to the Berklee School of Music.
Oh,
he's got a lot of talent, and he writes, and he performs. Well, actually, not during the pandemic. He just had his first live performance in over a year in New York mostly, but he travels around and performs. And he had a band for a while, and he writes music, but he also teaches a lot. And so he
Privately?
is teaching. He teaches privately, but also through a program.
Mhm.
And that actually proved to be his savings through. He was saved through that during the pandemic. There were no gigs,
Right.
and writing is an interesting challenge. But he lives to perform and to work. But he was keeping a pretty full teaching schedule in person, even when he was performing, and that switched to online. So he was very fortunate to be able to work through that. He has a number of colleagues who were much more performance oriented and had a tough year. Not that his year was easy.
Right. You went to the White House with Al Gore.
It did. 92, 93,
92.
92 campaign and 93.
Right. And how did you find it? What had you anticipated and what was the reality?
It was a lot more than I anticipated in terms of the breadth of the experience and the onslaught of challenges and issues. It was also a lot more than I anticipated in terms of the opportunity to do good things, particularly where I was working. The first term I was the vice president's deputy counsel, but I also ran his legislative affairs office. And since he was the president of the Senate as well, I was also in effect on the Senate leadership staff. And so for a political junkie like me and a legislative junkie, that really was a feast. And it was a lot of just a lot of engagement in any of the important initiatives that we pushed through Capitol Hill during that first term. And then the second
Were these the
term,
George
I
Mitchell
switched to
years?
Cabinet Affairs. They were.
Okay.
George Mitchell and Bob Dole,
Right.
eventually Trent Lott.
Right. And Secretary of the Cabinet. Now you're the second person I've known personally who served in that particular role. What does the Secretary of the Cabinet, for the record, what does the Secretary of the Cabinet do? And what are the opportunities as Secretary of the Cabinet to do good?
The role evolved out of it began during the Eisenhower administration, and I met the gentleman who was one of the first two people in that office, and he explained it as this is not the explanation I would use, but he explained it as an effort that they perceived was necessary to create a layer to insulate President Eisenhower from the various cabinet agencies. That there was a lot of incoming, so to speak, that needed to be managed, and I understand that perspective. I feel as if it was genuinely the primary motivation. I'm not one to question what they were trying to accomplish, but it for us evolved into an office that was trying to facilitate the way the policy councils do with a group of agency heads in both directions. So in terms of trying to coordinate the work of the White House on any given day or during a period to make sure that all of our agency heads were getting the current state of affairs, state of play, or the playbook, so to speak, from the White House for any given day or any month or quarter, but also to help to coordinate both the pulling up of opportunities through the agencies for the president to highlight or enjoy credit for, but also to get some early warning on potential problems that might be bubbling up through the agencies, and to be able to work through that in the White House and reduce the level of surprises. So that's, I know that's not the sharpest, clearest explanation or description, but there's a level of coordination that the office provides in both directions that, when it's working well, benefits both sides of that process. As you know, it's kind of unwieldy as an organization. This notion that the cabinet would meet regularly and advise the president on matters of policy or the day-to-day issues is not the way something that large could operate. And so pieces of that process tend to come together, and that needs to be managed and organized. And oftentimes it's an ad hoc group. So there might be 5 or 6 cabinet agencies on a particular issue that logically come together, and there needs to be a process to keep that functioning properly and keep the communication flowing. And that's where the Cabinet Affairs Office tends to operate. And one of the things we did was before I get to part 2 of your question, was the most seemingly mundane, which was the weekly report. But President Clinton had a process where each of us who was a senior advisor, there were usually about 10 to 12, produced a weekly report, and mine was largely on what was going on in the agencies. And we would invariably respond to things. It was mainly a report, but it would prompt him to think of things or to ask for more information, and we could push or slow things down, the tempo of things that way, and used it as a tool. One of the amazing opportunities in that job is what I think you're really asking about on the back end, which is the doors that open up when you're sitting in the West Wing and the president needs something, or the country or a portion of the country needs something. And it's remarkable to see, because these agencies have so much talent and skill that often it gets pushed this way or that way, depending upon political tides or the party in power. But the expertise is there, and sometimes it's a matter of spotting it, and the cabinet secretaries, when they're on their jobs, are watching for these things. And, or as we like to say, make sure you take care of any of your problems, or let us know if you have some problems where we might have to step in and help. But be sure to let us have an opportunity to share in your successes, which was really our way of saying, let us know what we can steal credit for, throw to the president or the vice president. And but some of to one small example of the surprises that just come from being able to pick up the phone from the West Wing is there was a period where there was a huge freeze and snowstorm in the Northwest and the Midwest, and turns out you can get some of these DoD cargo planes out, load them up with hay, and the airmen will push the hay out the back, and the cattle survive. It's you don't really think about those kinds of solutions day to day when you see a problem, when you pick up the paper. Maybe you do, and you ought to be driving these kinds of responses. But to have people in an agency see something and say, we have a way to deal with that, and to be able to make that connection, or to ask, can you do this? And they find a way. It's just an astonishing thing to see happen almost on a daily basis.
any regrets?
About anything? There's
That
too
you
many.
want to share?
Oh, I don't know. Probably, but not that I'd want to share because they're not fully formed.
Okay.
I'd rather think about the things that are available as opportunities, even though, as the saying goes, I realize I have fewer tomorrows than yesterdays. I still have, I hope, tomorrows to take advantage of. And
Well, based upon our time together and all the years I've known you as well, your years have been well spent. Thurgood, I want to close before I thank you and tell you about a moment that I was witness to that involved you and a security guard at the Supreme Court. And it was one evening, I think it was a Saturday night, and the March on Washington Film Festival showed a film about, I think it was Constance Baker Motley.
yes,
And
yes, I
you
remember that.
hosted us at in one of the conference rooms at the Supreme Court. And there was a panel discussion. Gilbert King was there, and others. And I think one person said something about, to stop saying that nothing has changed, because that really that really minimizes and insults all the people who gave so much to be where we are today, including your father. You, Gilbert King, and I were talking, and I was just a fly on the wall. The security guard passed by, and he stopped and he said, "Goody!" And you greeted him, and you enjoyed a warm and vigorous embrace. And when he pulled back, he said, "The most important day for me in this building was the day that I carried your father's coffin out of here." I've never forgotten it.
Oh, thank you for that reminder. It's a special place.
Yeah.
But you do know that my brother and I tore it up when we were little.
See, I'm sorry I didn't ask that question. You were a piece of work.
We didn't tear it up because that would. I did show up once when I was back from school. I had been doing research up in the beautiful library in the building, and they were having arguments, and I went down for 1 hour's worth of arguments, and I was wearing a sweater. And it was, the page came by with a note, and I thought, well, this will be sweet. And it was this is a courtroom, you need to dress appropriately, from my father, and just sort of slinked back to the library. But that was the only disrespect note that I can recall on my part in that building, because it's such a special place.
Yeah.
And there's a dumbwaiter there. I think it still works. I always try to check. And I told Justice Roberts when he first arrived that his kids might still be small enough to try it. I don't know if he did, but I just thought, somebody that not everybody has young kids when they're serving there. And
well, I'm glad you said it to him and not to the young children, because I can see you now touching them on the shoulder and say, "Get into the dumb waiter."
Right. That's right. But it's also a place where, the story where my father's mentor, Charles Hamilton Houston, who was his law professor and dean at Howard, who wrote I still have a copy of the typed manual typewriter typed notes where he outlined the entire school desegregation legal strategy in a memo. And many years before it was implemented. Just the genius, the legal genius and political acumen are all right there. He had, in one of his arguments at the court, Justice McReynolds, who was just an anti-Semite and a racist, turned his chair. He didn't leave. He turned his chair for the argument and sat there with his back turned. And to disrespect that institution that way, in addition to a lawyer who, as brilliant as Charles Hamilton Houston was, it is appalling to me. But the majority usually overcomes those potential tendencies. Every once in a while, someone like McReynolds shows up. And
I often think about, and one of the many reasons why I have missed Vernon Jordan is because he would spin wonderful tales about his days as a Howard Law School student, listening and sitting at the elbow of Charles Hamilton Houston and Thurgood Marshall and Spotswood Robinson, who was for a time on the faculty there, yes?
mm-hmm.
And Judge William T. Hasty, and the great work that was being done, the pioneering legal work that was being done, not at the Ivy League schools of the Northeast, but at Howard Law School.
Mm-hmm.
The great constitutional work was being done at Howard Law School.
Yes, and the students, Vernon's era, they were witnessing it as it was being done. Just astonishing, really amazing,
mm-hmm.
and helping.
Thurgood, is there anything that you would like to share with the archives that I have not asked, or you would like to talk about? You will have an opportunity to take a look at this tape and to amend it or request any further
mm-hmm.
information or questions if you would like. But while I still have you, do you have anything that you would like to say or share that I haven't explored with you?
Well, in the interest of time, I'll abbreviate a couple of things I did want to make sure I noted.
Okay.
I referenced only briefly Father Weston, who was in the pulpit at St. Philip's when we were going. If I'm not mistaken, he became the pastor there at a year or two after I was born. So it was probably 57, 58.
Mm-hmm.
And he was, I wanted to just mention him because he was part of a long line in that church of community leaders. And every church is deeply involved in community betterment and making that connection. But that church in particular has such a storied history in many different ways, whether it's voting rights or school desegregation, that I just wanted to make sure I mentioned Dr. Moran Weston here, because his leadership was at such a seminal, important period in our nation's history and the church's involvement. And then the other individual I failed to mention was Bishop Paul Moore, who was the bishop in New York.
Indeed.
Roughly the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And was just, for me, very saintly in my few interactions with him. But what I only recently learned, and that's part of the reason I also wanted to mention them both, is that I have a lot more to learn about how much they contributed literally and figuratively to my upbringing, because Gilbert King alludes to this in his book. But we went through my schooling, which was pretty exceptional in terms of the opportunities that I was able to enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
Those things don't come cheaply, and I'm only now learning how that happens. It's never explained to me.
What are you learning about how it happened?
Father Weston and Bishop Moore, I think, were pivotal in helping my family through that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And until someone disproves my premise, my assumption, I'm operating on it.
You have mentioned two very exceptional men.
Yes. Who I would have felt indebted to in many ways had I not known what I think I'm figuring out. But I thought this was the appropriate place for me to acknowledge that.
Indeed it is. And in what ways were they a part? I know Weston was your rector. Paul Moore was the bishop.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And were they in attendance at your home?
Not that I recall. So we would see them in other places.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I have these visions of Paul Moore having a martini with Lena Horne. You know.
Yeah, and I don't recall either of them being at any of these parties. Entirely possible, but I think I would have remembered both.
Do you have pictures?
Because they just not really. What I'm wondering is how many pictures are out there, but I don't think so. I don't recall a lot of pictures being taken either.
We didn't have iPhones.
Right.
Thurgood, thank you so much. You have been generous.
Thank you, Riley.
Time. You have been patient beyond what was necessary. And I am eternally grateful to you. I really am. So you'll be hearing from us, about the papers and all that stuff. Okay.
I'm grateful for all that you do. Always have been, always will be.
Thank you, Thurgood. Take care.
Now you're going to turn off the recording, and I have a couple of housekeeping questions to ask.
Okay. Hold on.